Hi, and welcome to Mrs. PM Reads. Today we're continuing in our story, Shoeless Joe by W. P. Kinsella. And we will be in part 2, which is most of the book. We'll label this one section 2. And in our last video, Ray heard ease his pain. And he knows that that is, I think it was, let me be sure, J.D. Salinger, who is an author, not a baseball player. So Annie has basically given him permission to go east and seek out this author. All right. How do I feel about this? Annie's question is indeed pertinent. What has my new assignment to do with baseball? Even while laboring in the baseball park, while sweat pours into my eyes and my blue work shirt is soaked to the color of a bruise, I tingle as if I'm looking forward to a first date. It is like when I was given the option of building the baseball diamond. I know what I have to do. I'm just not certain of how to go about it. A vision of what I have to do flashed in front of me as I heard the announcer's instructions. A scene that might have been projected by a shadow box was outlined on one of the clouds that hung over the stadium. The picture was of me and J.D. Salinger seated at Fenway Park in Boston, watching a baseball game, our hands busy with hot dogs, soft drinks, and scorecards. The scene was in black and white, Salinger silhouetted, so I could not see his physical features. I have only seen one photograph of Salinger, taken in 1951. It showed a dark-eyed young man with brilliant hair and eyebrows and black-green color of crow wings. Now, as the pallid winter sky lowers over Iowa like a gray dome, I wonder again and again how I am ever going to accomplish such a miraculous feat. Salinger, almost everyone knows, has been holed up like a badger on an isolated hilltop in New Hampshire for over 25 years. He has published nothing since a story in the New Yorker in 1965. He virtually never gives interviews, guards his privacy as if it were a virgin bride, even refuses to let his stories be anthologized, making an anthology of his stories. Sometimes, as I stare out my window at the snow swirling across the cornfield, ticking like sand against the tall green fence of the ballpark, I feel my problem is hopeless. In the spring, I must leave the loving warmth of Iowa behind, abandon this magic place, forsake Annie and Karen, drive over 1,000 miles to a New Hampshire mountain, and convince the most famous American recluse of the century to attend a baseball game with me at Fenway Park in Boston. Annie's family is right. I am quite mad. Why can't I settle for watching the baseball results on TV at 10:30 each evening and close reading the box scores in the peach-colored sports pages of the Des Moines Register each morning? Then, like any normal baseball fan, I could talk trades and averages with the mechanic at the John Deere dealership in Iowa City and develop a permanent squint from studying the sky, worrying about rain, or lack of it. But then the excitement races through me like minute corks bobbing in my blood. It must be minute. Corks bobbing in my blood. And I know I have to follow the instructions I've been given. Over the winter, as the days contracted with cold and the cornfields lay folded under a blanket of snow, I spent my time at the library in Iowa City, reading and rereading everything by and about J.D. Salinger. As I read, I discovered some uncanny coincidences. Or are there ever coincidences? I found an article, an interview I'd read some years before in the Des Moines Register, in an obscure literary magazine. The interview with Salinger was about baseball, and it saddened me as it excited me. It left me with a feeling of vague anxiety, of nameless fears snuffling about me like cold-nosed rodents, like reading of a favorite baseball player whose star has descended to the point where he parks cars at a restaurant or sits in a room above a delicatessen in Indianapolis drinking vodka and waiting for his pension. Salinger, the article stated, was a devout baseball fan, a man who kept a copy of the Baseball Encyclopedia in a prominent place on his bookshelf, a knowledgeable fan with a predilection to the Boston Red Sox, but one who avidly watched whatever baseball was available on television. So at least he knew of baseball. The interview established a vague kinship between us because we could be called ninth inning cousins, for I have always been a little eccentric where baseball is concerned. I advocate the establishment of shrines in recognition of baseball greats: Ty Cobb, Tris Speaker, Shoeless Joe Jackson, Ruth, Gehrig, Mantle, Mays, DiMaggio, and a few dozen others. Not just at Cooperstown, but at roadside shrines like the cairns that commemorate cavalry battles, treaty signings, and Indian uprisings. Sites where bleary-eyed travelers could rest for a moment, drink clear water, fill their radiators on broiling afternoons, and study the highlights of their heroes' careers recorded in bronze and granite. Grottos, perhaps, explosions of magnificent folly, a bronze of Al Gianfrido flying like Peter Pan high over the Yankee bullpen as he gloves a drive off DiMaggio's bat at the 415-foot mark, or of Willie Mays sprinting toward the bleachers, back to the plate, arms outstretched, hauling in Vic Werth's drive in the 1954 World Series. Whew. For days after I read that interview, I was more restless than usual, dreaming of Salinger exiled for 25 years, living like a guru on a mountaintop. Something seemed about to happen. The air was thick with anticipation. The interview saddened me so because it radiated loneliness. He hadn't, the article stated, been to a live baseball game since 1954, when he went to the Polo Grounds in New York to watch Sal Magley pitch, even though in 1965, in his last published story, Salinger had Seymour Glass describe baseball as perhaps the most heart-rending, delicious sport in the Western Hemisphere. If you hadn't become a writer, what would you have liked to be? The interviewer asked. When I was a kid, Salinger replied, I wanted more than anything in the world to play at the polo grounds. But I've seen myself grow too old for that dream, seen the giants move across the continent to San Francisco, and finally, they tore down the polo grounds in 1964. Those words deepened our kinship. I admit that I am overly sentimental about baseball. The interview touched my heart and made what I did next seem completely incongruous. Oh, I bought a gun. I have never owned a gun. Once, as a child of 10 in Montana, I took my father's single-shot .22 and fired into a row of sparrows that sat like tufted pegs on my mother's clothesline. I watched a dozen spring airward as if I tossed by a juggler, and one fell. The feathered droplet on the ground looked so small, it shivered like an old woman's hand as I picked it up. I actually felt its heart stop beating as I carried it in to show my mother. I was as proud as our yellow cat when she dragged home a snake or a mouse to prove her ability as a huntress. Bring it back to life, my mother said, looking up from her ironing board. The scent of scorched cloth drifted about the room, dark to my eyes after the blazing sky of outdoors. My mouth dropped open. I was expecting praise. Bring it back to life, my mother said again, holding the iron's dull silver base toward me as a knight might hold a shield. I stood dumbfounded for a moment. I can't, I whispered, feeling small as the bird cooling in my hand. Well, until you can, I don't think you should shoot anything else unless you need it for food. I have never again fired a gun. But now, in the dormant months of the new year, I drive the 100 miles to Des Moines and spend a day frequenting pawn shops in an area of the city where store windows are covered in rusted metal mesh. Grit crunches underfoot on the unswept sidewalks. Unshaven men with sunken eyes dog my steps. I look at handguns, all heavier than I anticipate, cold as fish, smelling blue and oily. I flinch as if burned when a swarthy proprietor drops a half dozen bullets into my extended hand. You're not used to handling a gun, are you? He says, smiling as he might at a child, his large lips dry and peeling, the orange-brown color of sweet potatoes. It'll grow on you, he whispers. It gets warm after you carry it for a while. The weight hangs right here by your heart, and he pats his stained vertical striped shirt. With a gun, you're never alone. He smiles again, showing long, twisted teeth. That's real literature, I say. I bet you didn't just make that up. Came from an NRA bulletin. You belong to the NRA. Not yet, I say, winking conspiratorially. He lowers his price by $15. Suppose you want it for protection? Doesn't everybody? The neighborhood's changing. You know what I mean. I smile shyly. As the winter passes, a plan of action begins to form, at first as misty as dawn rising on the cornfield. But as I discern and dissect each new nugget of information, something that adds to my arsenal of ideas, I hear sounds, eerie, unusual sounds, like ball bearings, smooth, silver, cold, being plopped into an unseen pool, sending out ripples in ever-widening circles. I sense that when the sounds stop, my plan will be complete. I will be able to begin my journey. You don't know him, do you? Annie's imagined question hangs like music in my thoughts. I don't know Salinger, but Salinger does know me. I discovered this in a stale-smelling copy of the May 1947 issue of Mademoiselle from the bound periodical room at the University of Iowa Library. Inside those yellowed pages, among Studebaker advertisements and ads featuring women who all look like the Andrew sisters, is a story called A Young Girl in 1941 with No Waist at All. It is one of Salinger's uncollected stories, and not a very good one. But while reading it, I discover that the young man in the story, Salinger's character, is named Ray Kinsella, my name. Suddenly, a thought, bleh, suddenly a thought shoots, there we go, through my mind. In The Catcher in the Rye, there is a character named Richard Kinsella, a schoolmate of Holden's who gives long and ambiguous answers to questions. Richard Kinsella is my identical twin brother. Salinger has used us both as characters in his fiction. If that is not a sign, an omen, a revelation, I don't know what is. Where did Salinger find us? How did he decide to use such an unusual and obscure name? Did he know someone by that name? Did he pick it out of the phone book or just make it up? There are not many of us around, a few in New York, Florida, California. My father's family once lived in New York, then part of it, including my grandfather, moved to the Black Hills of North Dakota. My father was born there in a sod hut on the open prairie, not far from Bismarck, North Dakota, in 1896. Except for my twin brother, I'm an only child. One of my uncles also produced two sons, twins, I think, whom I never met. They keep bees somewhere in Florida. I have fantasies of them one day appearing on my Iowa doorstep, dressed in pith helmets and gauze, shaking hands while wearing huge leather gauntlets. For me, it is an alarming experience to discover someone else with my name. But the idea that it is J.D. Salinger who has created the fictional me fills me with a warmth, the same kind I feel as I stand in the dark in my daughter's bedroom watching her sleep. I feel proud and very brave, but very scared. I study my map of the United States. It is red-veined as a bloodshot eye. And as I do, I hear a few more ball bearings plop into my imagination. I realize that I cannot go directly there, like some missile programmed and locked into specific coordinates. I cannot land in New Hampshire like a rock thrown through a window. I lay out a schedule. I imagine a little man with bifocals sitting in an office that smells of furniture polish and floor wax, charting out a baseball schedule. I study the home stands of the teams, draw red circles like vermilion lakes on the map, connect them with snaky yellow lines. Chicago, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, New York, Boston. I have to absorb the new season like sunlight, letting it turn my winter skin pink and then brown. I must stuff myself with lore and statistics until my fingers ooze balm with which I can staunch his wounds, whatever form they may take. He hasn't seen a live game in over 25 years. He needs my memories. And I will arrive like Little Red Riding Hood with a basket full of them, like crustless sandwiches under a cool tea towel. I'll tell him of the warm-ups of the home team in their white uniforms, doing calisthenics and wind sprints like fast-flying sailboats on a green sea. I'll make him smell the frying onions and hear the sizzle of the hot dogs. And I'll tell of baseballs scattered like white oranges on the outfield grass. I'll walk beside him as if I'm a bottle of blood swinging from a gray enamel standard. I'll pierce a vein and feed him the sounds, smells, and sights of baseball until he tingles with the same magic that enchants me. Then we'll ride off together as in the happy ending of a Western movie, drifting toward the closest baseball stadium. My journey will be like going out to hunt stars with a net on a stick. I have to make certain that there is plenty to share. I have to do all the right things at all the right times, in all the right places, fill my pockets with string and stones, a jackknife and a frog, have my suitcase bulging, arrive in New Hampshire as if I've been on a long road trip and am now moving in for a homestead. Interesting. Ray has quite the imagination, doesn't he? All right, we're going to stop there for today. We will pick, oops, sorry, bump the table. We'll pick it up tomorrow. I'm not going to give you my sign every time. I think we're 4 videos in at this point. You know, please subscribe to the channel. And if you do, you're going to click that bell tab, which will allow you to receive notifications every time a new story posts or a new part of the story posts. All right, you guys, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time.